Somebody just slammed $650 million onto the silver table and didn't even look up to see who flinched. No bell, no victory lap, no CNBC parade, just a quiet, brutal act that makes the market feel wrong. Because normal buyers shop for price. Strategic buyers shop for certainty. And when a strategic buyer shows up in a metal that already trades like a fire escape during a blackout, you don't get a nice rally. You get a stampede. You get a squeeze. You get a market that starts behaving like a locked room. And here's the part that should hit you in the chest. $650 million isn't a big trade. It's a message. It's somebody saying, I don't care what the screen says. I care what happens when the screen lies. So in this video, I'm going to do 3 things: fast, chaotic, and with receipts, you can understand even if you hate finance. I'm going to show you what $650M actually means in ounces, and why that math is more violent than it looks. I'm going to expose the only kinds of entities that can buy like that without blinking and why they do it. I'm going to explain how this changes the game, not just for price, but for the ability to source silver at all. And if you think this is just another silver hype story, let me stop you right now. This isn't a chart story. This is a delivery story, because charts don't build solar panels. Charts don't solder electronics. Charts don't harden supply chains. Charts don't win procurement wars. Metal does. And whoever just threw $650M at silver is not playing the same game you think you're watching. Now, deep breath. Let's make this real. If silver is trading at $30 an ounce, $650M buys about 21.6 million ounces. If silver is trading at $50 an ounce, $650M buys about 13 million ounces. If silver is trading at $65 an ounce, $650M buys 10 million ounces. And if you're hearing those numbers and thinking, okay, so what? Here's so what. Silver isn't like oil. You don't just turn a valve and flood the market. A huge chunk of global silver supply shows up as a byproduct of mining other metals, meaning the silver supply chain is not a faucet. It's a leak, slow, stubborn, delayed. So when a strategic buyer decides they want tens of millions of ounces, the question isn't, can they afford it? The question is, where do those ounces come from without breaking something? And that's where the game changes. Because the market, you see the spot price, the candles, the headlines, that's the paper layer. The real war is underneath it. Refiners, fabricators, vault inventory, wholesale bars, delivery schedules, offtake agreements. And one thing nobody talks about until it's too late. Who has priority when metal is tight? That is the battlefield. And $650M isn't a retail battlefield move. That's a general moving troops. So who buys like this? Let's stop pretending it's some rich guy. This is not a billionaire stacking coins in a basement. This is not a YouTuber screaming to the moon. This is procurement. This is policy. This is industrial survival. This is a buyer who thinks in quarters and years, not in candlesticks. There are only a few archetypes that can pull this off, and I want you to feel how cold each one is. Archetype Hashone, the industrial consortium. This is the quietest and most dangerous. Not one company. A group, solar manufacturers, electronics giants, automotive supply chains, defense contractors, all with one shared nightmare. You don't want to be the idiot who ran the factory out of silver. Because running out of silver is not like running out of printer paper. It's not annoying. It's catastrophic. It means missed contracts, penalty clauses, delayed shipments, scrapped production runs, layoffs, and competitors eating your market share while you explain to investors that you couldn't get a metal that most people think is just jewelry. So what do industrial consortiums do? They don't buy when it feels safe. They buy before the panic becomes public. They buy when the price still looks expensive to retail, because to them, the price is not the risk. The risk is not having it. To them, silver is not a trade. Silver is a component, a bottleneck, a survival input. That's why they can deploy $650M and barely consider it big. Because what's the cost of a stalled factory? What's the cost of missing a year of shipments? What's the cost of losing a contract you'll never get back? Suddenly, $650M is cheap. Archetype #2, the sovereign buyer. This is where people get emotional and start yelling conspiracy. Relax. Governments don't have to be evil to behave like governments. They plan, they stockpile, they secure supply chains for strategic industries. They don't announce it on TikTok. A sovereign buyer doesn't need silver because they think it's shiny. They need it because it's embedded. Energy transition, grid, military tech, electronics, infrastructure. A sovereign buyer cares about one thing. Will we be dependent on foreign supply at the worst possible moment? If the answer is maybe, they don't debate. They build inventory quietly. Archetype #3, the financial fortress. This is the entity that sees something breaking and positions like a machine. A major fund, a commodities house, a vault-linked institution, not because they love silver, because they understand market structure. They understand something retail rarely understands. In a tight market, the premium is not on the price. The premium is on the ability to take delivery without begging. So they accumulate metal like a chess player, steals squares. They don't need to predict the top. They just need to own the part of the board everyone else will fight over later. Now, here's where the story turns nasty. Because $650M doesn't just buy metal. It reshapes the flow. It changes who gets fed first. Imagine a city where water pressure is already low. Then one entity shows up and secures a private pipeline. Not by stealing water, by paying for priority. They didn't take water from you. They just made sure when rationing begins, you're not the one with a contract. That's how strategic buying works. It doesn't look like a robbery. It looks like professionalism. It looks like inventory management. It looks like risk mitigation. It looks like people in suits smiling politely while they lock the door. And if you've watched silver long enough, you know exactly what the door locking phase feels like. Violent spikes, nasty smashdowns, then higher highs, a staircase made of fear. Because silver doesn't trend, silver attacks. And the reason it attacks is because it's a small market with a big job. Now let's do the ugly math that people avoid because it makes them uncomfortable. Let's say the buyer wants 13 million ounces, roughly what $650M buys, at $50 silver. Okay, now ask, how much available silver is actually floating around at the wholesale level, ready to be rerouted? Not total silver ever mined, not silver in grandma's drawer, not silver in industrial products. I mean, the pool that can realistically be mobilized into bars, into vaults, into deliveries, that pool is not infinite. And it's not calm, it's contested. And the moment a strategic buyer starts pulling tens of millions of ounces, a second order effect kicks in. Other buyers get nervous because procurement managers aren't stupid. They watch lead times, they watch premiums, they watch availability, they watch the whispers from suppliers. And when they sense tightness, they don't say, let's wait and see. They say, increase buffer inventory. And buffer inventory is the most polite phrase for hoarding you will ever hear. So $1 650M move doesn't stay one move. It becomes a signal flare. It turns normal buyers into urgent buyers. It turns urgent buyers into panicked buyers. And it turns panicked buyers into the kind of buyer who will pay any premium just to secure flow. That's how squeezes go from interesting to unfair. Because the exit doors don't lock with one event. They lock with 1,000 reactions. Now, how would a strategic buyer actually execute this without spiking the price instantly? This is where people imagine a cartoon villain smashing the buy button. No. Real strategic buying is stealthy. It's boring on the surface. It's terrifying underneath. Here's how it gets done. They don't buy all at once on the visible exchanges. They build through OTC deals, long-term supply agreements. Streaming contracts are forward purchases. Relationships with refiners common. Preferential allocation with wholesalers. Delivery scheduling games. Vaulting agreements. And my favorite invisible weapon, taking metal off the maybe for sale shelf and putting it on the not for sale shelf. Because the squeeze isn't created by demand. It's created by removing float. That's it. Every squeeze is the same story in different costumes. The tradable pool shrinks. Price becomes jumpy. Shorts become fragile. Late buyers become desperate, and the market starts behaving like a crowded theater with one door. Now let me paint the scene the way it happens in real life. It's 2:17 a.m. somewhere. Not for you, your screen is quiet. But in procurement land, people are awake. Phones buzzing, emails. Can you confirm allocation for Q1? Can you guarantee delivery windows? What happens if lease rates spike again? Is your supplier still quoting the same lead time? And then the sentence that changes everything. We're seeing unusual demand. That sentence doesn't hit Twitter first. It hits inboxes. It hits relationships. It hits the hidden network of people who actually move metal. And once that network feels pressure, it passes the pressure down the chain like electricity. That's why, when silver finally moves on the chart, it looks like a rocket ship. Because the rocket launched earlier, the chart just caught up. Now, here's the part most people miss. A strategic buyer doesn't have to buy all the silver. They just need to buy enough to create doubt. Doubt is the weapon. Doubt about availability. Doubt about delivery. Doubt about whether the market will be there when you need it. And when doubt enters a supply chain, behavior changes. People stop selling. They start holding. They start prioritizing. They start allocating. They start gating. They start raising premiums because of logistics. They start telling smaller customers to wait. That's how a market transitions from commodity to strategic resource. And if you want to know what that transition looks like, it looks like this. The price rises, yes. But more importantly, the relationship between price and availability breaks. You can have higher prices and still not get what you want. That's the nightmare. That's the moment when money stops being the solution. Because the problem isn't price. The problem is flow. So, how do we expose the strategic buyer without pretending we have their business card? We expose them by motive, by footprint, by behavior, by the kind of buying that leaves fingerprints on the system even if the name stays hidden. Let me give you the tells. Tell has shown. The buying doesn't chase dips like retail. Retail buys dips because they want a better entry. Strategic buyers buy because they want a better probability of securing metal. So they don't behave emotionally. They behave systematically. They ladder. They accumulate quietly. They buy through channels that don't scream on a chart. Tell #2. Premiums and delivery times start doing weird things. Spot can fall while premiums rise. Spot can stagnate while wholesalers get tight. That disconnect is the smoke. When you see the paper price and the physical reality arguing with each other, that's a stress signal. Tell #3. The market starts producing stair-step violence. Up, smash. Higher, smash. Higher. That's the squeeze pattern. Because squeezes don't move in straight lines. They move like war, ambush, retreat, push, counter push. And if you've lived through silver, you know the smashdowns are not proof the squeeze ended. They're often proof the squeeze is working, because smashdowns shake out weak hands and refill the ammo for the next push. Now, let's talk about the most important psychological trick in this whole story. Most people think the buyer who changes the game is the one who buys the most. No, the buyer who changes the game is the one who buys with a different objective. Retail objective, profit. Strategic objective, control of outcome. You can't understand this story until you feel that difference. If you're buying silver for profit, you care about your entry price. If you're buying silver to keep an industrial line alive, you care about, will I have metal when my contracts demand it? That is a totally different form of buying pressure. It's not speculative, it's existential. And existential buyers don't sell because the price went up 12%. They don't flip inventory like a trader. They lock it away. They build stockpiles. They smooth their risk curve. They remove float from the market and don't apologize. Now, zoom out with me. Why would somebody do this now? Why not earlier? Why not later? Because the best time to secure a scarce input is before the crowd admits it's scarce. In every commodity squeeze, there's a phase where the truth is visible but not yet popular. That's the window. That's where strategic buyers operate. And $650M suggests we're in that window, or that the window is closing. Now, I'm gonna say something that will make some people angry. Good. Anger is usually what shows up right before the brain processes reality. If a strategic buyer is moving $650M into silver, the most logical assumption is not. They think silver is going to $500 tomorrow. The logical assumption is they believe the silver market is entering a period where access matters more than price. Because if they only cared about price, they could buy paper exposure. They could buy derivatives. They could buy proxies. They could buy whatever. But strategic buying like this is about metal, about possession, about custody, about delivery windows, which means the buyer is trying to solve a different problem than the one retail talks about. Retail talks about charts. Strategic buyers talk about procurement nightmares. Now, let's talk about the strategic buyer identity in a way that's actually useful. Not name, not rumor, not fantasy, function. What would the buyer be trying to accomplish with a $650M move? I see 3 dominant missions. Mission A, lock the manufacturing future. If you're in an industry that needs silver, solar, electronics, advanced batteries, medical tech, defense components, your nightmare is not silver goes up. Your nightmare is silver becomes unallocatable. So you pre-buy, you pre-position, you secure supply, you prevent competitors from starving you. This is classic supply chain warfare. Mission B, front run a structural repricing. If you're a financial fortress with deep understanding of commodity structure, you know that a small market under real physical stress can gap violently. Not because people got excited, because the market runs out of offer. So you accumulate physical or physical linked claims with strong delivery rights before the scramble. Then, when the scramble hits, you're not chasing. You're the one being chased. Mission C, prepare for a systemic credibility event. This is the darkest one. A buyer might believe that when markets become stressed, paper claims get messy, settlements get creative, delivery gets delayed, rules get adjusted. Force majeure becomes fashionable, so they want metal outside the mess. They want real custody, real control, real inventory. Now, if you're still with me, here's where it gets chaotic. Because the moment a strategic buyer changes the game, the market tends to create 2 crowds at the same time. Crowd 1, late buyers terrified of missing the move. Crowd 2, shorts terrified of staying short. Both crowds hit the same door. That's why squeezes come in waves, not one explosion, repeated detonations. And each wave does the same thing. It transfers metal into stronger hands. And the stronger the hands holding metal, the less elastic the supply becomes. Because no sellers don't become sellers just because the price is up a bit. They become sellers only when they're satisfied, or when they've achieved their mission, or when they forced a renegotiation of the entire market. That's why the early part of a squeeze looks like a trade, but the later part feels like a hostage negotiation. Now let me tell you what changes on your screen when this is happening. You start seeing moves that look irrational. Silver rallies hard for no obvious reason. Then it gets smashed at obvious levels, round numbers, psychological levels, like somebody needed the market to print a headline. Why? Because when markets get tight, they become more strategic. Smashdowns do 5 things at once. They kill FOMO. They force liquidations. They reset options exposure. They scare weak hands into selling. They create proof for bears, so the crowd stays confused. Confusion is useful because confusion delays the stampede. And strategic buyers love delay. They want time to accumulate while the crowd is still debating whether the fire is real. That's why the most dangerous squeezes often climb while the narrative stays skeptical. Silver is just bouncing. It'll come back down. This is temporary. And while people argue, metal moves quietly into vaults, into long-term hands, into the arms of whoever just deployed $650M like it was a casual expense. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to buy. I'm not your financial advisor. I'm here to tell you what this kind of buyer implies. Because the implication is the story. If a strategic buyer is accumulating like this, the real consequence is not price goes up. The real consequence is the market starts paying for certainty. And certainty is always more expensive than the metal itself. Let me translate that into real-world behavior. When certainty becomes the premium, you get long-term contracts, replacing spot buying, inventory buffers increasing across industries, higher wholesale premiums even when spot is flat-lagged, tighter allocation to smaller buyers, higher lease, borrow costs when people need metal, now one. And eventually, you get something most retail investors don't understand until it's too late. The market stops offering metal freely. It offers metal conditionally. If you're a big client, you get served. If you're small, you wait. If you're retail, you pay up. If you're late, you pay the most. That's how it always goes. Now, what does exposing the buyer look like in practice? It means recognizing the playbook, because strategic buyers leave patterns. Here's the playbook I would expect behind a $650M deployment. Step 1, accumulate quietly through OTC channels. No headlines, no chasing candles, just steady suction under the surface. Step 2, lock supply with forward agreements. You don't just buy today's metal, you buy next quarter's flow. Step 3, build redundancy in custody. Multiple vault locations, multiple refiners, multiple routes. Because if you're strategic, you're not only worried about price, you're worried about disruption. Step 4, let the market argue while you continue. They love debate. Debate is time. Step 5, when the market finally moves and retail arrives, you're done. You're not buying then, you're watching then, because you already own the scarce thing. And now the scarce thing owns the market. Now let's talk about the game-changing part. How does one buyer change the game in a global market? By changing the marginal ounce. Markets are set at the margin. If the marginal ounce, the ounce that normally appears when price rises, stops appearing, price becomes unstable. Because the market can't equilibrate smoothly. It gaps, it jumps, it squeezes. And the moment the marginal ounce becomes controlled by strategic hands, you get a new regime. A regime where price can move faster than people expect. A regime where volatility becomes a feature, not a bug. Because volatility is how the market rations a scarce resource. Volatility is a rationing mechanism. It scares away weak demand. It punishes leverage. It rewards whoever can hold. And strategic buyers can hold, that's why they win. Now, let me give you the cinematic version of what this looks like over the next phase. One morning, silver prints a number that makes people choke on coffee. $68, $72, $79. Something that feels like it shouldn't happen. Then the smash comes, a red waterfall. Social media explodes with "see, it's over." And in the background, quietly, the strategic buyer smiles. Because smashdowns don't hurt them. Smashdowns help them. They refill the market with supply from frightened hands. They let the buyer accumulate more. They keep the crowd from stampeding. And then the next wave comes, higher high. Another smash, another higher high. A staircase built on people's disbelief. That's why the squeeze feels like a horror movie. Because the monster doesn't run at you in a straight line. It appears, it disappears, it appears closer. Now, let's talk about what you viewers should watch. Because this is where most people become uselessly emotional. Stop watching opinions. Start watching mechanics. Here are the mechanics that matter when a strategic buyer is changing the game. Premium behavior versus spot behavior. If premiums stay elevated while spot dips, that's stress. Lead times and allocation language. If suppliers start using phrases like limited allocation, delayed delivery, subject to availability, that's stress. Borrow, lease conditions. When borrowing metal becomes expensive, that's a signal that people need metal now. Inventory optics, you'll see headlines about vaults, flows, movements, sometimes framed as nothing unusual. But the story is not the headline. The story is the direction and the urgency. The shape of price moves. Squeezes climb like staircases, not like smooth lines. Now here's the hardest truth. Even if you never buy a single ounce of silver, a strategic buyer like this can still affect you. Because silver is embedded in the stuff you rely on. Energy infrastructure, electronics, medical devices, industrial systems. When a strategic buyer starts locking silver down, the cost pressures don't just show up in the silver price. They show up in manufacturing economics. Margins tighten, projects delay. Substitution accelerates. Quality trade-offs happen. And the world starts learning again that the future isn't only about software. It's about materials. Now, do I know the name of the buyer? No. And anyone who claims they do without documented proof is trying to sell you an emotion. But I can tell you what they are. They are a buyer that has crossed the line from speculation to strategy. They are a buyer that believes silver is no longer just a commodity. It's a constraint, a choke point, a strategic lever. And the moment a market becomes a strategic lever, price discovery stops being polite. So let me end this in the most honest way I can. You're watching a market where the public argues about candles, while the real players argue about delivery. And $650M is not a flex. It's a procurement statement. It's a warning shot. It's someone saying, we are not going to be the ones begging for ounces later. If you felt that sentence, you understand this entire video. Now drop a comment with one word: bombshell.